Foundations podcast. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now, here's your host for this week, Melissa Stevenson.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. You are on Student Ministry Conversations. I'm your host today, Melissa, and I've got my friend Heather here to talk about social media and youth ministry. But real quick, before we get started, if you have any questions or want to look at past episodes or show notes, etc., please check out our website, studentministryconversations.org. You can find all of our bios and ways to connect with all of us there. So if you want to be a guest on the show, please, because that is one of my weaknesses of this is finding people to talk to. I'm so lucky that Heather said yes today, and I'm so excited to talk to her. So Heather and I used to work together. You can see today I'm in my house because of when school got out and all that jazz. But normally if I was doing this in my office, I'm at her desk because I stole her office when she left to pursue other fun things. And so youth director, children's director. And so Heather, why don't you give us the bio of Heather and how you got to be where you are now?
So I'm Heather Juarez. I graduated from Hardin-Simmons in 2015 with a degree in ministry. My last semester there, I had to have an internship at a church, and First Methodist was lucky enough to give that to me. And so I was interning there for my last semester, and then they loved me so much that they just hired me on. So I became the assistant children's pastor there for 3 years and then took over as full-time children's pastor for the following 3. But while I was there, I really started falling in love with marketing and social media. And so through that passion, I was able to get to the job I have today, which is at Plugged Marketing in Abilene, and I am the social media director.
So I think that you have a really neat perspective to share with us today because you were in the ministry world. So I think it's when we think of it the opposite way, when marketers try to talk to ministry people about things they can do to use social media to the best of its abilities, sometimes there's a missing component there where they just don't understand quite what we need. And because you've had all the experience and now in your education, but now that you're in the marketing world, I think that lends to you've got the missing piece. You know where we're coming from and the even the logistics and the language that we're speaking. And so I'm really excited about what you could bring to us today. And we've probably talked about social media on the podcast today, or not today, with other hosts, but I think you have a different perspective. So we made a list of questions that we could have a guideline of what we could talk about. So what do you think what role does social media play in today's student ministry? And how can it be used effectively to increase student attendance?
I definitely think it's a great way to be able to not only keep kids engaged, but also reminding them of what activities are coming up. Instead of just, back before social media was as big as it was, we would send home flyers and we would hope that those flyers would get put on a fridge or even make it through the door. And, and so having the social media account is a great way of being able to remind them of what's coming. I think it's also a great way to remind them of what event just happened, of something either that they just attended or maybe something that they missed. So it gets them excited for the next thing that's coming. Because they're like, oh man, I missed that. That looked so fun. I need to make sure to go to the next one. And so it's a great way to remind them of those things. But I also think it's a good way to, what's the word I'm looking for?
Encouragement?
Yeah. Thank you. It's a good way to just encourage them and to remind them that you're there for them and not just, I'll see you next Sunday, have a great week, and not talk to them at all for the week. It's a great way for them to know you're around, you're here for them no matter what.
Yes. So I have two thoughts on that one. First of all, I think they can absolutely use, especially those things that just happened and now they're on social media, that they can then share that with their friends to say, hey, you could also come with me to this cool thing that my church did. And so I love that aspect of it because they can tell their friends, but having that visual component, we know that there's different types of learners, but having that visual component really, I think it makes it just more effective. And then encouragement. We've actually talked about doing that on this podcast and with our social media accounts, is doing in a word of encouragement from like one host a week kind of thing for that midweek, when some youth groups are having that midweek service, but some are not. And so what can we say to help youth pastors in that middle of the week for them to get over the hump of like, okay, let's keep going. Like, what do you need as a word of encouragement? So I think that's really good aspects of social media. I also like it because we do have that problem of, I find this a lot when we're in the office all week. The kids are at school. Like, my job is to interact with students, and that's really hard to do when we are not in the same, and I literally cannot get to them. I legally cannot get to them. And so I like that way of reaching out to them and to say, hey, I'm here. Reminder, if you want to talk about something, like, call me, that kind of thing. And so that we're not just here on this Sunday. So I love those aspects. Those are great. How do you ensure that your social media efforts align with your ministry's goals and values?
I definitely think, first off, you don't need to be doing it alone. It doesn't need to just be you taking care of everything. I think the first step is that the church as a whole, whatever committee you want to have in place of that, needs to have some form of rules in place of what it looks like for their church to be online. What do they want their church represented as online? And then if you have that, great. If you don't have that, go to your head committee, go to your admin board, go to your youth committee, whichever one you need to do to talk to say, hey, I really think we need to get these things in place so we make sure that not only the youth team or the children's team, but also anybody else in the church who is utilizing social media for the church is following the same guidelines. It's always wording is going to be the same for the church. The looks are going to be similar for the church. You want a cohesive, coming from that marketing side of things, you want that cohesiveness to happen. I don't want to go on let's say I go to a church's website and I'm like, oh, they have social pages. And I go to their social pages and every single one of them looks totally different. And it looks like this church has 15 different groups and none of them talk with each other. None of them, it makes it look like nobody is partnered with each other. And so you want to make sure that there are rules in place. And then I think from there, with your team, like I said, don't do it alone. Don't be the only person that has access to that account, because you want safeguards in place. And write out what your goals and values are. So now that maybe the church has something put in writing for what they want it to look like, now go write it down for the youth or write it down for the children. Write down what your goals and values are for your department specifically, because those are going to be different than what the goals and values are for the overall general church. So write down what yours are and go from there. Just figure out, how can we take Facebook? How can we take Instagram? How can we take TikTok and take those specific platforms? Here's the best use for those, and how can we align that with what we have? And that's going to involve a whole team meeting. That's not just going to be something that you can just sit down and figure out on your own in 30 minutes to an hour. I think that's going to take multiple people coming together and agreeing this is what that looks like.
I like all those things, especially the other people having access. I love that safeguard, first of all. Not be talking with one person on social media accounts, on your messenger and things like that. But also, if you're on vacation or unavailable, like
Yeah.
you're in the hospital, those kinds of things, you have that backup in, and it sets some of those boundaries of, I don't respond to social media after this time if I'm
Yes.
meeting with my family, those kinds of things. So I do like that. I like that you brought up that we need to have the overall, the same logo, the same, maybe the font, but then you brought it back to the different levels, because my youth social media account is going to have a lot different content
Yes.
than my adult, especially with our adults, their
Yes.
senior
100%.
versus the children's department. It's going to have just different content, but I like that you're making the effort to have that same, maybe the font or the color scheme or the logo be similar, so it does look those
Well, and
cohesive. I love the word cohesive. I just can't say it.
you also want to make sure that the actual words that are being used to describe your church is the same that everybody
Mm-hmm.
else is using.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But also, thanks to, as much as I don't like saying this, thanks to Meta, so you have Facebook and
Uh-huh.
Instagram together, you can schedule those things out without having to pay for a separate platform. So it's also something you don't need to stress about. You don't need to go, oh my goodness, I have to post something today. Let me quickly make something. Because when you
Mm-hmm.
stress and quickly make something, it most likely is not going to end up aligning with the overall vision you want for your group. And so being able to plan stuff out and schedule them out, like you
Mm-hmm.
said, when you go on vacation or somebody ends up sick and in the hospital, or if you have stuff planned out, you don't have to stress about, am I still going to have content going up? Am I still
Mm-hmm.
going to have engagement happening? Because that's already taken care of. And a great way to also get some of that content is through your own students. Form form a team of some of your youth kids and say, "Hey, we're really trying to do better with our social media. We're trying to reach y'all better, and I want your thoughts and opinions on this. I want you to help
Mm-hmm.
us make some of that content." And when they're making it, they're going to most likely be more willing to then share that content because they've created it. So now they're willing to
Yeah.
share it with their friends. But
Yeah.
don't give them access to the pages. Let them
Oh, that was going to be on the list.
yeah, let them create content through your phone, or they could create it through their phone and send it to you. But don't
Mm-hmm.
give them access to the social media pages themselves. Have them send it to you, and you can decide how, when, what it gets used as from there.
Mm-hmm. If you had like a team, like for example, you have a board, we've been talking about this in the youth group, where you have, the president of the youth group, and that, because we had this when I was in youth group, and I just have not had enough students to make it happen at this one. So we were talking about this the other day in youth group, about them planning events. That was one of the things that I was the youth group secretary for 6 years, and so I wrote the newsletter articles about the youth group and made the calendar. But we all got together, this board, and planned out the calendar. And so I think if you had a board like that where you really trusted, maybe it was a senior, then you might be able to have that access. But I think you have to be very careful with it.
Yeah.
I think you have to be very intentional and safeguards where you also can see and you have the ability to delete very quickly, things like that. We actually had that happen. The school went to, instead of Remind, they went to another platform
Mm-hmm.
because they were going to try it. And the band program, which my husband is a band director, they did not know that it had a chat feature, and they did not know that they needed to turn that
Ooh.
off. And so one evening, 150 messages. And then finally, one of the kids goes, I think the directors are on here. And then the next one goes, and your mom's, because it was all the parents as
Mm-hmm.
well. But so it was going off on Colin's phone and my phone and Patrick's phone, and as the student, the parent, and the director. And then he's going, no, trying to stop it. And they finally got it turned off. But it was a really, really good lesson in the being able to work technology quickly to delete things, because then it deleted the entire chat thread. But it was also really funny as a parent just sitting there watching, because they were like, skibbity toilet, all of that things. We're recording. Just say hi to Miss Heather and then go away. Okay, off we go. We were just talking about Colin, and he walks in the door. So I sent him a text and everything that said, "Hey, I'm on a podcast. Don't come in loud." Alrighty. So we talked about possibly giving them some access. I hadn't thought about that topic of if they create it, they're more likely to share.
Yeah.
That's really
well, and you know for a fact that if they're creating it, it's things they want to see. It's
yes.
what is popular. It's the music that's going to be popular. It's the dance crazes or the sayings, or because when we say things like skibbity toilet, they roll their eyes and want to go
Yes.
throw up. Like,
Yes.
but if they're saying it, it's totally different. And so being able to
Yep.
have a youth committee made of youth that are creating the content themselves. And I would also recommend not having just your popular and outgoing kids on that committee. Have a good diverse group of kids. Have ones that are have a couple on there that are your more quiet in the background, because the content they're watching is probably totally different than the content your other kids are watching. Like, they all have a different perspective and a different view on what social media is to them, which I think leads into our next question. Great. Of
What
what
are
are
some
some
ways social media can help
build a sense of belonging? And I think we've all seen how social media can bring a community together that doesn't exist for that person locally. It has created this whole separate world outside of your world. And I think being able to have your youth group online and being able to have them on social media, well, hopefully maybe that brings some kids to your social channel that you may not see in church for a few months, but they found you because of what content was created. They discovered, oh, I may actually have a community that I fit in with at that church that I never would have known existed before because of content that was created.
Yes. Yeah, I like that. Oh, and there was something that blinged in my brain right when you were talking about that, and of course it blinged right out. About having that sense of community. Oh, because they will have, whether you know about it or not, I recently found out, they will have group text with the kids in the youth group, but it won't be everybody in the youth group, and the youth director will definitely not know about it. So then they'll be talking about you. And so that can create exclusion and then makes people feel like they do not belong and they cannot come to this group. And I can't control that. That's still going to happen. But I like that this is a way that I can have everyone included.
Yeah.
And especially those quiet ones that just may be on the little weird scale, and that's okay. Because you're right, they have that different view, they have that different voice.
Yes.
And so I like that a lot. We were talking about that in church the other day for the guy that took over your job 2 people after you. That we were talking about what ages are on what platforms. Whether, my age is still on Facebook, and yours is, I swear, barely on Facebook. But that age that just came walking in here is more Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat. And so that could matter what platform you are on of what your content could be. And so he was talking about trying to get young people content on Facebook. And I was like, they're not on Facebook. So that would be a wasted post, to be a wasted. I mean, it's not like we pay per post, but wasted time. And so I think that's interesting to make note of.
Well, and
so
in the marketing world, we talk a lot about creating content for different platforms. And I think that just what you were talking about is exactly that. If you're trying to reach the parents of your youth group, then yeah, you're going to need content for probably a little bit of Facebook, but for Instagram. But what you're creating on Instagram for the youth kids is going to be very similar to what you're creating on TikTok. And that looks very different. Like, it's all, some businesses, some companies can get away with having the same content on Facebook and Instagram. But as far as this goes, trying to reach your specific demographic, you're going to
Mm-hmm.
have to create specific content for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Which, yeah, you want to create things that speak to
Yes.
them so that they go, oh, wait, they know me. I can
Yes.
go. So, how do you think that digital platforms can help youth leaders stay connected with students between weekly meetings and events? Is it that big encouragement, or is it just post about what's coming up, or is there something else?
I think it's mainly just creating content
Mm-hmm.
that they are interacting with, not things that they are just seeing and going, oh, cool, and maybe sharing it, which is great because you want their friends to see what's happening. So hopefully they'll invite their friends to the next event or the next service. But also creating content that is having them interact with it. So maybe you have, you know, Wednesday night coming up and you're like, okay, I have a lesson planned, but I don't have anything else planned for that. I don't have a game. I
Right.
don't have, so maybe create a poll and say, hey, trying to figure out what we want to do for Wednesday night. What do y'all want to play? Or maybe if you serve dinner, what do you want to eat? Here's 4 options,
Mm-hmm.
and letting them, and that's going to not only create them interacting with your post, which is going to make them see your content more because the more people interact with it, the more they're seeing it. But
Right. The
also when
algorithm.
they come to youth on Sunday or Wednesday, and you're playing that game or you're eating that dinner, they're like, yes, I voted for this. I was so excited for it. Or, oh
Mm-hmm.
man, I was hoping maybe we would get this other one. So now it's also creating conversation at youth group. And so
Right.
have things like polls going. Have, maybe not necessarily a contest, but, hey, whoever sees this and tells me this word can win a candy bar next week, or have
Mm-hmm.
something that again makes them engage with the content, not just, hey, we're having sloppy joes and we're watching a movie next week, see you on Wednesday. Like,
Mm-hmm.
great, now they know about it, but beyond that there's nothing for them to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like the say the secret word and you get a prize kind of
Yes.
thing, because it's not overly complicated.
Yes.
I think there's some thoughts about using social media that I can't do it because I'm in my 40s. No, like I can't do it because I don't know how to, or I don't know these special, like I don't know how to use CapCut or what Meta's bringing out now, edits. I don't know how to use all these fancy things, so I can't do it. But those were very simple suggestions. Like, and then I was going to ask if polls were still trending, and so yes,
Yes.
yes for
Yes.
that. But I like that anybody could do
Yeah.
those things. Like, you just really only have to have your phone. Like,
Well, and again, going back to having that committee of youth kids that are helping you
mhm,
make this content, they're there to help you create content on the nights so then you can use them later, but also to talk to them and be like, hey, you know, let's figure out what can we do that's going to make y'all engage on social media. If I made a poll
mhm,
about this, would you do that? Or if so,
yes.
run ideas by them. They're not just there to make stuff for you, but also run ideas by them before you ever even post. And if they're like, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
I think that's a great idea, cool, let's do it. Or I don't know, I don't really think people are going to interact with that. Cool, what do you think they will interact with? And get
Right.
ideas
Yeah.
from them.
Or if they go, "Oh, Miss Melissa, what are you talking
Yeah,
about?" Like that, the eye rolls, then don't do that. That's
100%.
the international sign for stop.
100%.
That is not cool anymore. So we talked about using social media with your kids using it, but also we want to make sure that we protect ourselves and the church. I think you had a really good point about making those values and those rules, and especially like the point about writing them down, because writing things down, having them in written form, can really create. A CYA kind of moment that, no, I'm following the rules we all agreed on, so I cannot get in trouble for this. But what do you think are some of the biggest safety concerns? And now you're a mom, so these are things you're going to have to start thinking about. Maybe not today, he's one, but um, like when, how do you police this? What are some safety concerns we need to think about?
Uh, First, I think a lot of it is just you have to remember you're interacting with people that are under the age of 18. So it's
Mm-hmm.
the same safety concerns you and I had when we were physically interacting with them at church under the age of 18. You
Mm-hmm.
don't want to have really, you have one-on-ones, but when you have one-on-ones, you maybe have a camera in the room, or you have a door open, or you have safety precautions in place, so that way nobody can come back and say that they think they saw something different than what they did see. And I think the same goes for being online. You have to remember you're talking to someone under the 18. And so you need, like I said earlier, you need multiple people who have access to those social channels. And you need to also let kids know, hey, we have these social channels, which means there's the messaging feature. I would love for you to contact me if you need me for something on there. But just know other people have access to this. Other people can see, because let's say somebody reaches out to you and is having a conversation with you over Messenger, because sometimes it is easier. I know me as somebody who has anxiety, a lot of times it is easier to have a conversation with somebody over text than it is to have it in person. And so they decide, you know what, I'm going to message Miss Melissa and tell her what's going on. And if they're talking to you through this whole thing, and then they come to church on Sunday, and somebody who also has access to that saw all of those messages and comes up to them and said, hey, I would really love to pray for you over this issue. Well, now you possibly have lost that kid forever. But if they know from the get-go other people have access and can see what's being talked about, then yeah, they may still have those tough conversations, but it's not.
They don't have an expectation.
Yes, hopefully they won't then be run off if somebody does again come up and go, because everybody has the best intentions. And I just wanted to pray for them. I felt so bad for that situation. And but they need to know from the get-go that that's what's happening. And I would also have firm, these are the hours that I can answer messages, and the only way I will answer something outside of these hours is if, like, you're in physical harm or you're going to cause physical harm, which is the same you would have with a student that texts you. Like, hey, I can talk up until, 8 p.m., but after that, I don't answer my phone unless you get something from a student that's like, I'm going to cause physical harm, or, hey, I'm drunk at a party, can you come get me? Or, those types of situations.
I've gotten those texts.
Yes, those types of situations. So just make sure that they understand what the rules are when it comes to messaging. And also, I personally, if I was running a social channel that was for youth or for children, if I had a kid message me, I would probably then text somebody that's on that committee and say, hey, so-and-so has messaged me. I just want somebody else to know we're having a conversation online. So that way there is that safeguard of, I have a second person that's aware of what's happening.
Yes. I've got two things to add on to that. So I would also have a conversation with those that are watching about confidentiality.
Yes.
Because we know that sometimes there is a viewpoint that kids do not deserve confidentiality, and especially in ministry. And I am to the point of, I will keep it confidential unless you're going to harm yourself or others, the big ones. And so, especially if they're having anxiety about a situation, that's not something that everybody needs to know. So I would definitely have those other people on that platform, but we need to have a conversation about, they don't need to be spreading this information either. And maybe don't talk to that student about it either. Don't go up to them and say, oh, I just want to pray for you, because they may not be in that headspace for that moment. And then there was a second part that I thought about. We were talking about, oh goodness, what was the last part you just talked about? It's like right here on the tip of my nose.
Texting somebody to let them know.
No, that one. No, it was about the texting at the late time. About your hours.
Yes.
And so I do think those are super important to have as well. Like this is when I will be available, but in case of emergency, yes, you can still text me, message me. I knew what it was. there were kids that we had that had phones. They had like their parents' old phones, and they had Wi-Fi ability, but not cell plans. And so that was the way they could contact us to be picked up for church and things like that, was through Messenger, because it was Wi-Fi enabled. And so I think that's very important. I also wanted to leave on this one note, because I think we're almost out of time here, because we have to eat dinner. That we need to make sure that we don't just do things on social media, and we still have to keep the communication with a newsletter or texting the parents, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We can't only do it on social, because we need to be cognizant of those parents who are not going to let their kids on before Facebook is 13 technically. So or parents that are not going to let their student have social media at all, or a phone at all, because we don't want to make them feel excluded. Would you agree with that?
100%. 100%. Yeah. You need to have multiple forms of communication, because even before social media, we still had to have multiple forms of communication. We could send a flyer home and the parents would be like, well, I never saw it. Okay, so let me text you. Well, I never got the text. My phone was out of minutes. Okay, let me email you. You still need to have so many different forms of communication, so that way somebody can't come back and say, well, I didn't know. Okay, well, I sent it out in all of these different ways. I don't know how else besides carrier pigeon I can get you to know.
Smoke signals, SOS, like there's ways, Heather. We just have to do that. So no, I totally agree.
I didn't know these things.
So I want to thank you for coming on. I hope that this was information that our friends listening today can help them become better equipped as youth pastors, youth leaders in any church that they are at. I loved the conversations we had today. You could really take those to any church, any denomination, but also any youth group, people that deal with kids, like nonprofits, PTO, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, all of those. I think all of those activities and suggestions apply. And so thank you so much for sharing with us today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So don't forget to listen every week. We'll have stuff out. We're going to do some new stuff this season, and we'll see you later. Have a great day.